بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته وإترته أجمعين. We've been looking at Imam Fakhruddin, Imam Al-Hujjah, Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi radiallahu ta'ala anhu's Al-Usul Al-Kulli or Al-Qanoon Al-kulli, to be more precise. And we had from his book from his book Asas al-Taqdees. It's also known as Tasis al-Taqdees, I think. But I know it's more as Asas al-Taqdees, even though the book I have, I think its title is Tasis al-Taqdees. Anyway, last time we looked at we made some point about reason and aql and naql. So what's the difference between aql and naql? And today we are going to look at what zahir is and what is ta'arud, and how there can be a contradiction or between apparent contradiction between reason and revelation, or aql and naql, etc. But I wanted to make some more point about different ways in which al-aql is used in Islamic disciplines, including ilm al-kalam. So there are several contrasts. So that's why the context is very important in which the contrast is being made. For example, one contrast we looked at was between reason and revelation. Even though al-aql and an-naql, even though an-naql doesn't mean revelation, it means just the transmitted knowledge. And in this specific context, what we are specifically talking about is Al-Quran, the book, and As-Sunnah, which is the exposition of the book, which is the kalam of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or which is wahi, revelation as well, but revelation which is not the Quran. So this is the general contrast of which we talked about last time. An-naql. So it's through naql we know that, for example, salat or namaz is obligatory. If you don't have that naql merely on the basis of al-aql, you can't invent namaz, a specific form of worship, a salat. But 1 + 1 is 2, or 2 + 2 cannot be 5. You don't need a naql for that. God has given you a power known as reason, through which you can find out, in conjunction with experience and all that 1 + 1 is 2 and 2 + 2 cannot be 5. So that's the general contrast. And obviously there's no contradiction between an-naql in the sense that there's obligation of, because both are from creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though an-naql is not as such his creation, that is its will or transmission of his will. Al-aql is his creation. So there's no contradiction between 1 + 1 2, and there are 5 prayers, daily prayers, 5 namaz, obligatory namaz. There's no contradiction. What is the contradiction? And obviously we use reason to understand what we mean by 5 in the context of 5 prayers, for example, and understanding even the literal meaning, we need reason for that. So there's no contradiction between al-aql and naql as such. Nobody says that there is. Yes, because our use of reason is imperfect, and sometimes our understanding of an-naql is imperfect, so there can be contradiction in our understanding of an-naql and our use of al-aql or reason, and there can be a contradiction between the perfect understanding of an-naql and our use of reason. So that's what we looked at last time in a fair bit of detail. But today we'll try to get at some other. So this is the general meaning of al-aql or reason, in which it is contrasted with an-naql. But then within reason there are different aspects of reasons which are contrasted with other things which are generally under the umbrella of an-naql, but might not be under the umbrella of, generally in the umbrella, under the umbrella of reason, but might not be called reason in more specific senses. So we'll get to that today. So first contrast is between aql. I'll just use aql without that, and naql. Reason and the text, let's say, or transmitted knowledge or revelation, whatever you want to call it. That's the contrast. But reason itself, reason itself has 2 senses, more general sense and more specific sense. So it's important to understand in what sense people are talking about reason. In general sense, reason includes what we call reason, but it's also include what we call sense perception or knowledge through senses. It also include experience in general. For example, habits and all those things. What is generally comes under sense experience, custom, habit in the human sense. And in a more specific sense, where reason only means something which deal with abstract entities like numbers or abstract qualities. For example, volition or color as such, not this or that color, or thing as such, not this and that thing, for example. So in this specific sense, reason is aspect of mind which deals with abstract entities, abstract concepts, or concepts as such. So when reason is contrasted with, Imam Razi is contrasting here with an-naql. This is aql. By a reason, it would generally mean reason in the specific sense, not in the general sense, I think, because the contradiction he is talking about is more logical contradiction rather than, for example, a logical possibility and impossibility, rather than habitual possibilities or possibilities, or psychological possibilities or impossibilities. Or even though even like Muslim logician, especially the Aristotelian Muslim logicians, they don't make clear distinction between psychology and logic, and what is studied under logic. It includes at times epistemology, psychology. It also includes at times metaphysics of thought. So that creates various problem as such. But when Imam Razi contrasts reason and an-naql, or reason or revelation, or reason or transmitted knowledge, what he's contrasting an-naql to is a reason in the specific sense. That's a general comment, but it might not be always consistent, so we have to look at in each and specific, each individual case, what he is using al-aql there, in which sense he is using it as. But generally this is a very important distinction between reason in the specific sense and reason in the general sense in which we use. It's a distinction which is similar to what Kant makes between understanding and reason, for example. But it's similar, but not the exact distinction. Okay. So, for example, if we talk about impossibility, for example, so we can talk about physical impossibility. We can talk about physical impossibility, that I can't jump, or I can't fly, for example. But these are impossibility. These are not rational impossibility. Physical impossibility is not rational impossibility in a specific sense. Similarly, we have psychological impossibility. A lot of time in our logic, they talk about psychological impossibility as, and define logical impossibility in terms of psychological impossibility of a sort, which is obviously a mixing up of psychology and logic, because logical impossibility is different from psychological impossibility. as for example, among Muslim scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah, you will find in Ibn Taymiyyah, or in modern scholar, for example, you will find in logician Frege, for example, and Huzul, for example, in some of his work, developed a critique of Frege from logical point of view, and Huzul from a phenomenological viewpoint. So when Imam Razi talk about rational impossibility, what does he mean? For sure he means logical impossibility, but a lot of time he defines, or people in his school define, logical impossibility in terms of psychological impossibility, and obviously they are not the same thing. So you have physical impossibility, psychological impossibility, logical impossibility, and then we can also differentiate between logical impossibility and rational impossibility. Rational here in more specific sense, because not all rational impossibilities are logical impossibilities. We'll give some examples of them when we looked at the Al-Qanoon Al-kulli in detail. And then you have what they call experiential impossibility or habitual impossibility. So habitual impossibilities, for example, we've seen the sun coming out from the east and down in the west, but so that repetition makes us think that it is impossible the other way around, even though if we consider physics and cosmology of it, it might become more of a rational impossibility. But the way it, we do it from the viewpoint of induction, for example, it's a habitual impossibility. But then there are many types of habitual impossibilities. So if you look at the Ilm al-Hadith, for example, Ilm Usul al-Hadith, you look at the definition of a tawatur. And the way they define it, part of definition is tuhilul adatu. Like in practice, it's impossible. Ada here mean practice, I think. It is impossible for so many people to agree on falsehood. So that's a tawatur. They also say a tawatur is a dalil al-aqli. It's a rational evidence. It's not, and they're using rational in more general sense, because obviously habit itself is not rational in the more specific sense, and habitual impossibility, which they mention in tawatur, is not rational impossibility of sort 1 + 1 is 2, or 2 + 2 cannot be 4. So but obviously the sort of impossibility they talk about in the definition of a tawatur is different from the type of impossibility you will talk about in, for example, sunset and sunrise. It is very important to differentiate between all these senses of and saying the التواتر is dalil al-aqli. And as I said, al-aqli here mean aqli in the more general sense, which includes habit, for example. So this is a dalil al-aqli, which is used as a dalil al-shari in terms of the status of hadith and its attribution to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So getting clear about the idea about this distinction is very important for understanding Imam Razi's Al-Usul Al-kulli, the contradictions between the zahir of naql and certain matters of reason he talks about. Will or should involve a deep understanding of all these distinctions, especially if you want to develop a fairer but critical understanding of Imam Razi's Al-Qanoon Al-kulli. So I just provided a map here, but as we go along, we'll define these terms a bit, in more detail as the need arises. Okay, thank you.